morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for inviting Barb and I to come and give a talk about our experiences in Derry. I see some of our friends from Newport are here, and some of our where we used to live, and some of our friends from Westernville, where we now live. I want to give a special shout out to Dennis Schoenwetter over here. Raise your hand, Dennis. Dennis helped me with the PowerPoint, and it would be a total disaster if he hadn't helped me. And then, just to introduce my wife, Barb. There she is. She was part of our, certainly part of our experience. We got to Derry in 1970, and we had just fairly recently been married. You see the mental calculations going on. Yes, it's 55 years ago. And I'd like to ask a question. I think I'm going to get some positive answers here. How many people have been to Derry? If you have, you know that, especially in the 21st century, you know that Derry is really kind of a neat place to visit. There's lots to see and so forth. Here is, make this work. This is a photo of Derry, present day photo. I think that's the Guildhall there. I'm not totally sure. You can see the wall, right? Derry's a walled city. It has what's said to be the most complete wall around a city center anywhere in Europe. When we were there in 1970 to 72, we only were able to walk small portions of the wall along the parapets because of security. And when we went back in 2000, I think it was, we had a chance to make the whole circumference of the wall. It's over a mile, and it's really quite interesting to do. There's another picture of the wall looking from the outside. Now, one of the things you noticed if you were in Derry, and if you haven't been, go. It's just a great place to visit. Yeah, one of the things that is notable today are the murals, right? Yeah. There are murals that have been painted on walls and house sidings and everything. And it's really a prominent feature of Derry. This one here, you can see, there are many. This one shows Bernadette Devlin with the bullhorn. She was a famous activist. Look particularly at that woman who's crouching there. You may not be able to tell, but she has a garbage can lid, or bin lid, as they would say, and she's banging on the pavement. And that I saw that a number of times, and that was an alert that the police or the army were in the vicinity. This mural depicts the famous or infamous Bloody Sunday, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So this is a tourist attraction. I think they kind of overdo it, but it's a tourist attraction. It's good for the city, and that's a good thing. Well, in 1970, when we arrived, Derry was far from being a charming city. Quite the opposite. And here I want to show you another mural, which is the granddaddy of all murals. Now, I have a photo that I took, which I couldn't find, so I got this off the web, but the photo that I can't find shows quite a barricade of wrecked cars going from the right side there across the street. Derry was barricaded for over 18 months, not allowing the police or the soldiers to come into the district. This obviously is the Bogside, a Catholic district. I'll say more about that in a minute. So what are we going to cover? We're going to cover real quickly antecedents. What happened to lead up to this? In 1689, King James's forces were besieging the city where William of Orange was situated. Very famous incident where 13 apprentice boys grabbed the keys to the gates and locked them to keep the King James's Catholic forces from entering the walled area. I'll talk about the apprentice boys later because they're a very big player in what happened even up to modern times. 1921, you all know, was partition. 6 counties were carved off to remain part of the United Kingdom, and the 26 counties became part of what became the Republic of Ireland. And then 1969, we're going to talk about that, because 1969 is considered by those who've studied this to be the start, the beginning, the spark of the modern day troubles. And in that regard, we'll talk about this. I'll show you a little video. The Battle of the Bogside, August 12, 1969, was the beginning. It lasted for almost 3 decades until the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. Following that, there was the rebirth of paramilitaries, the IRA. There were 2 branches of the IRA, the officials, which were an older branch, and the provosts, the provisionals, which were a new branch, which were much more aggressive and prone to violence than the officials. And the UVF, there was a number of Protestant paramilitary outfits that sprung up. UVS stands for Ulster Volunteer Force. The atrocities between these 2 groups against people of a different religious persuasion was really quite awful. The Royal Ulster Constabulary, those were the police. Their adjunct or their reserves were called the B Specials. B Specials and the RUC were notorious for their abuse of the Catholic minority. We're going to talk about internment, which was the rounding up of suspected terrorists and sending them off to prison. A very, very controversial action. We're going to talk about Bloody Sunday, January 30, 1972, where in response to basically a civil rights march, British soldiers opened fire and killed 13, later the 14th died, 13 civilians and wounded many more. We'll talk about that. That was probably the signature event in Derry over the course of the Troubles. And then we'll end up talking about inquiries, the commissions that were set up to examine what happened on Bloody Sunday, who was responsible for what happened. I'll talk about those. Okay, some facts about Derry. What's in a name? Is it Derry or Londonderry? This, folks, even today is extremely controversial and contentious, right? The name Derry derives from the Irish Dura, which means oak grove, which then evolved into the word Derry. In 1613, a group of investors, speculators from London, petitioned the government to change the name to Londonderry. I guess their aim was to try to entice people to come from Scotland or England and settle in the area. It's a hot issue even today. There have been petitions, campaigns, attempted legislation, you name it, to officially change the name back to Derry. They have not been successful. Still officially, it's called Londonderry. Population in 71 was about 83,000. Now, I tell people this is a little bit deceptive because Derry is a very compact city. When you leave the outskirts of Derry, you're in the country. If you think about Utica, well, what's outside Utica? Well, Whitesboro, Yorkville, New Hartford. Not so in Derry. It's a very compact city. You can walk from one side to the other probably in an hour. Sectarian breakdown. In Northern Ireland, in the 6 counties, the Protestants comprise 58% of the population. Catholics, 38%. In Derry, 78% of the inhabitants are Catholics, and the remainder are Protestant, or no designation. The districts in Derry, the city districts, there's the Bogside, which we just mentioned. Above the Bogside is called the Cragan Estates. They were overwhelmingly Catholic. The Protestants lived in the Waterside district, which is across the River Foyle on the other side. Now, if you were on a stroll through these districts, you could not mistake where you were. In the Catholic districts, curbstones are painted white, orange, and green. There are nationalist flags hanging and banners. In the Waterside district, the curbstones are red, white, and blue. There are Union Jacks hanging everywhere. There are murals depicting Unionist views. The Bogside and Cragen, I showed you on that first slide, were turned into what called a no-go area from 1971 until the Army finally broke it up in 1972. Now, that didn't mean you couldn't go there. We would go down to a lovely fish and chip shop in the Bogside, walk in, get our order, and walk out. But if you were police or a soldier, you literally could not go in there. More on the name. You can see that some people object even today to a road sign that has Londonderry. A little anecdote. So Barb and I traveled to England. We came back on the ferry from Liverpool to Dublin. We went through customs, and the customs guy said, "Now, where are you going?" I said, "Well, we're going to Derry." He said, "Oh, I love the sound of that." Why was I there? Why were we there? Was stationed at the United States Naval Communication Station, Londonderry, which is in the Waterside district. It was the oldest U.S. naval base in the UK, dating from 1942. Its task was radio communication to the fleet in the North Atlantic. There were 3 sites: the main station at Cluny, the receiver station, which was right nearby, and the transmitter station, which was about 25 miles away on a mountain, Mount Bambrata, near the village of Dungiven. Now, I was stationed when we first got there. I was stationed at the Dungiven site. Let me explain how the site was laid out. There was a whole bunch of trailers that had electronic equipment. There was a transmitter field with many huge radio transmission towers. And there was the office. The office was another trailer. And in the office, there was the skipper, the commanding officer of the unit. There was a senior chief petty officer, and there was me. And I describe myself as sort of the radar O'Reilly of the unit. I was a clerk, right? Well, you could look out the windows into the antenna field. And one day, my senior chief petty officer said, "Smits." "Yes, chief." "Get out there and get those blankety blank 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 sheep out of the antenna field." "Yes, chief." So I go out there and I got my jacket and I'm waving my jacket for crazy. And sheep did what sheep do, which is nothing you want them to do. So I like to say, tongue-in-cheek, I was probably the only shepherd in the United States Navy, but not a good one. There were about 300 naval personnel at the station. Now, one of the interesting things was, I felt this then and I feel it now, is that this group of sailors were the only people, the only cohort in the entire city who could literally go anywhere safely. Right? And the reason was that the folks there viewed us as neutrals, not involved in their struggles. So we'd go to the Waterside, we'd go to the Bogside, you'd go to any pub you wanted to. I was always a bit surprised that the Navy bosses never said, "Don't go here, don't go there," whatever. We could really go anywhere, and we did. And it gave us a chance to see things and talk to people that nobody else in the city could do. The Derry brides. Not a small number of the sailors were there for their second and third tours. The reason was they had married Derry women, Derry girls, who wanted to be back with their families and said, "Hey, I want you to put in for assignment back to Derry." The base closed in 1977. We left in 72, and it closed because of the Troubles. Things were heating up, and There was concern on the part of the Defense Department and the administration that there would be an incident and that a sailor would get hurt or killed or what have you. So they directed that the station be closed. It was actually moved to Scotland. I have a book, I put it on the table there, I found by the last commanding officer of the station. He wrote a book, it's fictionalized, but you can tell it's factually it's right. And he talked about the closing of the station. What really was controversial, created a lot of anger, is that the station was turned over to the British Army. People did not like that. And there he is. Look at that sailor, huh? All right, here's what we're going to talk about. Civil rights. Discrimination against the Catholic minority in many venues, but including housing and employment. Now, you might ask, well, how could you know who was who? Right? These folks looked the same, talked the same. If you walked down the street, you couldn't tell who was a Protestant or a Catholic. Here's how it worked. You apply for a job. The interviewer says, where'd you go to school? Right? Well, if you went to St. Patrick's, say, it's okay. If you applied for another position or housing, well, where do you live now? Well, I live in Cragen, or I live in Bogside. Oh, okay. I'll tell you, from all I've read and seen, discrimination against the Catholic minority was a real thing. High rates of unemployment. Unemployment was rampant in Northern Ireland and in Derry. Now, we all know that high rates of unemployment can be a precursor to civil unrest. Gerrymandering. Imagine a city where 78% of the inhabitants are Catholic and 30 whatever percent are Protestant. Who do you think ran the city? Right, the Protestants did, because they had gerrymandered the district so that they could not lose in council elections. And then there's republicanism, nationalism, ties to the republic, and there's loyalism or unionism, ties to the UK. Very hot issue. Let me mention how civil rights began to morph into civil war. The example I'm using here is called Burntollet Bridge. Burntollet Bridge is about 5 miles outside of Derry. It's kind of a rural road. In early 1969, a group of civil rights advocates planned and did a march from Belfast to Derry to protest discrimination. When they got to Burntollet Bridge, there was a mob of Protestant, I call them thugs, who attacked them. Interestingly, promoting anger was the fact that the police who were monitoring the march just simply stood by and allowed the beatings to take place. 87 marchers ended up being sent to hospital. And there's a photo from a booklet I have. You can see the marchers in a ravine there, and the Protestant fellows with sticks and whatever, standing up and then beating them. The start of the Troubles, everyone acknowledges this. The start of the Troubles was August 12, 1969. And it relates, it's called the Battle of the Bogside. And let me show you a short video. If I can make it work.
Hello and welcome to History Pod. On the 12th of August 1969, the Battle of the Bogside began in Derry, Northern Ireland, marking one of the first major conflicts of the Troubles. The city of Derry had a large Catholic and nationalist population, but local government was dominated by Unionists. Frustrated by the situation, in 1968 the Derry Housing Action Committee joined with the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association to press for improved conditions for the Catholics in the city. Many Unionists saw the organisation as a front for radical Republican groups. These tensions spilled over into violence in late 1968 and early 1969, in the midst of marches and protests in Derry that were attacked by unionists while the police refused to intervene. The Civil Rights Association and other protest marchers were subsequently banned, but the tensions remained and reached a climax on the 12th of August when around 15,000 members of the Protestant Apprentice Boys of Derry were given permission for their customary march to take place in the city, even though the police advised against it. The march celebrated an historic Protestant victory and was described as a calculated insult to the Derry Catholics, as it ran very close to the Catholic area of the city known as the Bogside. Some of the marchers threw pennies at the Catholic residents, who responded with marbles fired from slingshots. The violence soon intensified, with both sides hurling stones and, later, petrol bombs at each other. Members of the Royal Ulster Constabulary arrived to find barricades erected by the Catholics, prompting direct battles between the two. The rioting continued for 3 days, with the police flooding the area with tear gas before the army was eventually brought in to restore order on the 14th of August. By the time the violence subsided, over 1,000 people had been injured.
The first fatality in the 3 decades-long troubles was in Derry when... Microphone. Thank you. Was in Derry. My helper. Thank you. The first fatality in the Troubles, and you'll see later there were thousands and thousands more, was in Derry when the RUC burst into a home in the Bogside looking for a rioter and beat Samuel Devaney to death. So what happened next? The British arrived. The British arrived on August 14th, 2 days after. And they arrived to keep the Catholics safe from Protestant violence. That changed very quickly, and the Brits became the symbol or the manifestation of British rule. The rebirth of the IRA. There were 2 IRA groups. I might have mentioned this. One was the officials, the older group. The provosts or provisionals were the younger group and much more prone to violence. And the Protestant paramilitaries, Ulster Volunteer Force, and the Ulster Defence Association. And then I talked about the Royal Ulster Constabulary and the Peace Specials, not neutral in dealing with the Troubles. Now look at this photo here. It's kind of fuzzy, but look at who's in the crowd there. What are they? They're young men, right? And we saw this more than a few times, and you'd see children 10, 12 years old out there hurling rocks, right? I always used to say that the favorite after-school activity in Derry is rioting. So what happened over the course of a couple years? Well, rioting I talked about became almost an everyday experience. There was substantial bomb damage. I'll show you a picture in a minute in the city center. Remember, the city center was very compact. You couldn't be anywhere without being at risk of a bomb going off. By December 71, 7 soldiers had been killed and police. In 1972, in all of the provinces, the 6 provinces, it was the worst year for fatalities. There were 479 and almost 5,000 people injured. These are some photos that I took. This was at Great William Street, if you know where that is. There's a bunch of soldiers sort of sequestering themselves from a petrol bomb that had just been thrown. And there's the soldiers responding, running after who they thought might have been involved. There's an example of bomb damage. This was it right in the city center. I used to go this way from work to home. Right by there, there's a little kind of circle thing, go by there. There's another photo I took, kind of fuzzy there, but it shows the aftermath of yet another bomb. This photo here I took on my way to the dentist. My dentist was in that building. And I walked over there and said, no dentistry for Steve today, that's for sure. Let's move on to internment. August 8th, 1971. The Army and the police swooped up suspected terrorists and took them off to prison. There were a couple of prisons. The most famous one, or infamous, was Long Kesh. Hugely angering people. You can talk about the fact that there was terror response, and so forth and so on. Internment made people who were already on edge a lot angrier. Here's some facts about internment called Operation Demetrius. That day, there were 341 suspected terrorists rounded up in jail. There were ultimately almost 2,000 put in jail. No trial, no due process, just put them in jail. Most of those were Catholics. 4 days, talked about the violence. 4 days after internment, there were 20 civilians killed, 2 IRA and 2 soldiers, and 7,000 people displaced by violence from their homes. Well, the troubles became personal to Barb and I. On the evening of August 10th, 2 days after internment, we were living in a flat on the Strand Road, maybe half a mile-ish from the city center. It's a beautiful night. The sun goes down late there in the summer, right? It was like 10:30 at night out. And we were just enjoying, we were entertaining an Irish friend, Isabel McCafferty, just listening to music and enjoying ourselves. We heard an explosion. Boom. Another explosion. Boom. Another explosion. Boom. And then the last explosion, which was that. The flats were situated above a car showroom, and they had glass all the way around and cars on display inside. And someone put a bomb. There's an alleyway between there and a factory across the way, and someone put a bomb there. Now, we always speculated this. The owners of the dealership were a Catholic, McGeady, and a Protestant, Thompson. It's a guess, but we wondered if they were targeted because people didn't like that collaboration. Just a guess. You want a deal on a car, they could give you that for sure. This is the second floor flat. We lived on the third floor, but you can see in their kitchen things were pretty much knocked over a stove and other stuff. This is the bathroom in our flat. You see the windows blew in and whatnot. Now imagine car showroom glass everywhere, short alleyway between us and the factory across the way. The night watchman for the factory opened up the door, and we thought, we need to get out of here. So we walked across the alleyway, covered with glass. Well, I forgot to put my shoes on. I walked across this alleyway, glass, I don't know, that deep, and I never got a scratch. That's my car. Boy, we love that car. It's a little Mini. We used to take it every weekend. We'd drive off into the countryside in Donegal or wherever. It was really on its last legs. In fact, we had to bring a 2-gallon jug of water because the radiator was leaking. And there you can see the gallon jug there in the bottom right.
Definitely on its last legs.
All right, so now what do? We're out of a place to live, right? For a couple of weeks, we stayed in a hotel. I would go to work every day, but Barb was kind of stuck in the hotel, and she would, more than once, she would get the wafting of tear gas that was fired against the rioters. At night, we would hear gunfire. Where are we going to go? Well, I'll tell you. I'll explain this picture. The Navy commanders got together with the British Army and said, we've got a place where they could live. This was a house owned by the British Army. It was about 4 miles outside of Derry, very rural. It overlooked overlooked a abandoned weapons dump. Well, the British couldn't put their personnel in there for obvious reasons. It was completely unsecure. So they made it available to us. Now, I'll have to explain this picture, but this was a great place. I always say you could move in with your toothbrush. It had everything you needed for residential living. The front of the house faces on the opposite side, and this is the back, and the windows you can see are the bedroom windows. And I took this picture, it's not a great one, but if you can see the line of vegetation sort of in line with the windows, it sloped down to a road, and the road was about eye level with the bedroom windows.
Two-story building.
Two-story, right. This is the second floor. So the first week we're there, things are great. Saturday night, 11:15, the pubs are closed. I hear a shuffling of feet and chattering coming up the road. The boys are coming home from the pub. We're in bed, Barb and I hear this, British bastards, go home. Well, that made me nervous. This building had not been occupied for a while, now known to be a British housing, and now it's occupied. So here's what I did. Monday morning, I get out there and I got my Navy uniform. I was getting a ride, I didn't have a car, right? Getting a ride from a buddy who lived further out. And I got out there in my uniform. People would drive by and I'd wave, and they'd wave, right? I thought, this might take care of it. The next Saturday night, 11:15, you're shuffling and chatter up the road. I hear this, Yankee bastards go home. I was much relieved. Okay, we're going to talk about Bloody Sunday, January 30, 1972. There was a march, organized march, from the Cragen Estates and the Bogside Catholic to the Guildhall, which was the municipal buildings, in a protest march. And when they got to the Guildhall, there were going to be speeches and banners and all that sort of stuff. The march was banned. The authorities said, you can't march, and if you do, there'll be arrests. Partly to handle the arrests, the British Army brought in the First Parachute Regiment. Now, this unit was renowned to be a very tough unit. Rough guys, right? Their task was to make the arrests. Now, how you arrest more than a handful of 10,000, 15,000 people, I don't know. There was typical rioting that ensued, typical, meaning we see it all the time, near an apartment complex called the Rossville Flats. It's gone now. If you go to Derry, you won't see it. They tore it down. As a result of that, the British soldiers from the Parachute Regiment opened fire on unarmed civilians. They shot 27 and they killed 14. I can't tell you the shockwave that this created across Derry and the entire province. It was international headlines. A friend of mine from the base, he was a civilian, his name was Tony Martin. I think he worked in maintenance or something. For some reason or other, I can't remember, maybe Tony sold me a car, maybe it was because of the car. I was up in his house in Cragen, and Tony, this is Saturday. Tony said, come on down to the parade. It's going to be great. It's going to be a lark. Well, this is one time the British bosses said, do not go there. And I didn't. Monday morning, I go to work, reading the newspaper. It was the Daily Mirror. It's kind of like the British equivalent of the New York Post or the Daily News, tabloid. After the headline, in the first couple paragraphs, there's Tony Martin describing, eyewitnessing people being shot dead. I'm thinking, geez, I would have been probably with Tony Martin if I'd gone. The outcry was intense. There's a paper from a couple days later. All right, so what to do about this? There were two inquiries. One was right after the event in April of 72. It's called the Widgery Commission, named after Lord Widgery. It met as early as April. It issued its report 10 days later, interviewed only 114 witnesses, and it concluded, well, there's really not any proof that civilians were shooting or throwing petrol bombs at the Army. Found no culpability, right, on any side, but it did admit that the soldiers may have fired recklessly. Everyone rejected this as a whitewash. People absolutely, totally could not believe those findings. Agitation about this continued for decades afterwards. People were still saying, we need to know the truth. So a second commission, the Saville Commission, was ordered by Prime Minister Tony Blair in 1998. It met off and on for 12 years, interviewed 2,500 witnesses. It concluded, among other things, that the one para regiment was unjustified in its firing, that its officers lost control over the troops, and that there was no evidence that any of the civilians posed any threat to life. It also concluded that the Army lied. And then after the report was issued, then Prime Minister David Cameron issued an apology to the people of Derry. Kind of unprecedented that governments ever admit an apology. So was there criminal accountability? Well, in the end, a little bit there was. Soldier F. Soldier F was indicted for killing 2 unarmed civilians and wounding several others. This I find to be fascinating. On September 15th, which is next week, 53 years, 7 months, and 15 days after Bloody Sunday. By the way, the people in Derry were ecstatic, but not happy that only one person was actually criminally indicted. But 53 years after Bloody Sunday, the trial of Soldier F will commence in Belfast next week. So here's the overview, the tragic numbers, 1969 to 1998. Across the province, there were 3,720 people killed. There were 47,541 people injured. There were 503 British soldiers killed. 3,000 were injured, and 303 police were killed. There was almost 37,000 shootings. Probably more, but that's what they recorded. There were 16,000 bombings. And in Derry City and County, there were 350 killed. So that's where we were and what happened. I hope you have questions. I have some suggested readings. There's some books on the table. I have some suggested viewings. I highly recommend Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland. It's a PBS series. And Say Nothing, which is on the table. So, thank you very much. Happy to answer questions. Yes, ma'am.
Is there going to be an actual person at the trial next week?
She asked if there's going to be a person. The answer is yes. They identified him as Soldier F because they were concerned, rightly, about retaliation. Now think about this. If Soldier F was 20 years old, say, in 1973, he's over 70 years old now, right? Hey, murder is murder, right? The clock doesn't run out on murder, but I think and what will happen, no one knows, but there at least is one person held responsible for actions that resulted in other people's deaths.
How do they explain the other deaths as for nobody being responsible for them?
They really couldn't pinpoint her question was, how do they explain the other deaths? And they really couldn't pinpoint who pulled the trigger, who shot Joe or William or Tom. Couldn't tell.
I was just curious, were you interested in getting out of there with all this going on? I mean, did you?
She asked if we were interested in getting out of there. Here's the thing. I was 21 and she was 20, right? And what kind of fear and concern do you have when you're 20 and 21? Not enough. So while it was awful to see, right, and we knew people who were affected, I have to tell you, it was kind of fascinating too. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Soldier F, was he charged with killing specific people?
Yes.
So was it father and the young?
I could look it up. I saw it, but he was charged with 2 specific individuals who were killed. Anything else? I have some books that I've used over the years. They're up there. They're interesting, I think. Take a look and thank you very much.
Thank you.